If you have any kind of desire to lead or even influence others on behalf of Christ, whether as a church leader or just sharing some thoughts on social media, do not miss the passage in 1 Timothy that we have been looking at. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can really easily take for granted, digging into history and languages, as I'm able anyway, to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and then apply at least some of what God has for you and me in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope that you'll do that with me. We're making our way through the book of 1 Timothy, and we've been sitting for a bit on chapter 3, verses 1 through 13. We're going to look this time in part 4 at just verses 1 through 7, which in the ESV reads, "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil." Okay, in part 4 now of our look at this passage on church leadership, we're going to finish up the verses focusing on overseers/elders and make some observations that I think are also valuable for us as geeks who want to just influence others for Christ in various ways. So verses 4 and 5, again, says, "He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church?" I don't think that these verses necessarily indicate an elder must have children. That is something that just would have been naturally expected to be the case when this was written. However, I think it is wise for churches to prioritize seeking elders that do have children, because it helps establish a track record of wise leadership for a candidate. This passage highlights the importance of the husband being the one who is ultimately held responsible for how his household is managed. The word for household here refers to all the people forming a family, and so the spiritual health and overall functionality of the family is expected to be overseen by the husband and father of the household. His wife is certainly meant to be a close partner in that, as Scripture elsewhere affirms many times. And this verse doesn't speak to how this philosophy plays out in terms of individual responsibilities, tasks, etc., but the greater weight of responsibility for the health and functionality of the family is on the husband/father. And a chief indicator or measurement of that, mentioned here in this passage anyway, is that the father keep his children submissive or obedient. Now, unfortunately, I think many Christian men have been aware of this idea, or their parenting has been indirectly and selectively influenced by this passage in a sort of cultural trickle-down sort of way, but they then make the jump to assuming that as a father they need to be stern and commanding as a default mode of interaction with their kids. And they miss the counsel of Scripture elsewhere, for example in Ephesians 6:4 in the ESV, which says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Colossians 3:21 in the ESV, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." It's not enough to merely achieve the net result of submissive, obedient children. Verse 4 says this must be done with all dignity, which here refers to a mode that is pure and honorable. The way discipline is achieved must be in step with the character of God. A wise father understands that discipline and instruction should not be given in an unnecessarily forceful way that provokes anger. They understand that provoking anger leads to discouragement in a son or daughter that does not result in real discipline. Many children raised by overly controlling parents throw away the values their parents taught them the moment they have their freedom and independence. And so their submission while at home was not genuine from the heart, recognizing the love of their father and obeying from a place of love and trust. They were just biding their time, or at most obeying out of fear or maybe intimidation. It makes perfect sense to me that Paul would recognize that unhealthy and ineffective management of a family suggests that a man would lead a church in a way that is also unhealthy and ineffective. Yes, firmness is required at times as both a dad and a church leader, but in both roles, men should lead without unnecessary force. But of course, neither can dads and church leaders afford to be overly passive and uninvolved. It must be real, actual management, but management that takes care of those being managed. Notice the pivot in terms in verse 5. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? It doesn't repeat the word manage or use the word care twice. It uses both these words, manage and care. The implication seems to be that managing and caring are both part of the complete package of leading in these different yet related spheres of life. If you're a geek who is also a parent and you suspect that God may want to use you in a leadership role or an otherwise influential role, this scripture should say loudly to you and me, take care of your family and lead them well. It's a major training ground for what God may want to do with us in other roles. Parenting and managing our families can feel like a drag when we have other things we're more drawn to, but it's actually crucial to our development as well. It was some of the lowest lows of failing as a husband and father that helped me start on a journey of true humility. And I'd be in no place to even attempt being an elder at my church as I am now if I hadn't had those experiences. There's so much more that could be explored here, drawing connections between the skills of good parenting and the skills of good leadership, but I'm going to leave that for each of us to ponder individually for now, and we'll move on to verse 6, which says, he must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Becoming a church leader soon after one first comes to believe in Jesus is a recipe for disaster. There are reasons I can think of for that that are not mentioned here by Paul, primarily that of lacking wisdom and understanding of Scripture, but Paul specifically here expresses concern that they would be puffed up with conceit, meaning here to be prideful and thinking too highly of oneself. Church leaders need to have a humility about themselves, which doesn't mean thinking about how bad they are and rejecting all affirmation or positive evaluation that they receive, but rather having a right, accurate assessment of oneself that doesn't go an ounce above what is true about themselves. The role of elder/overseer must be held by those who understand their role to be that of servant to others and servant also to the church as a whole. A role that is elevated in authority and organizational structure, but that does not give them more value and significance to God. In saying that a conceited elder may fall into the condemnation of the devil, this seems to be warning that just as Satan fell in status and circumstance because of his pride, leaders in the church are vulnerable to this as well. It doesn't get so specific as to teach anything about one's eternal state, but simply that a conceited elder will be subject to a big, hard fall brought about by God, just like Satan was. And this is true for us as geeks, too, because we are sometimes more thoughtful or well-read compared to others maybe in our social circles, but that also means we can be in danger of pride. And although we should share what we've learned or thought about to the degree it can actually benefit others, we have to be on guard against assuming more of ourselves and our knowledge or our maturity than we should. It doesn't take much of a misstep in our words or actions to damage or destroy our credibility. That's the kind of condemning fall we can take. Even worse is an intelligent person who does not acknowledge their missteps, who doesn't realize they have lost credibility and yet still continues to presume they should be listened to. I think we've probably all been in a room with a geek that doesn't realize, oh man, they're going on and they don't have any credibility. And that's, that's a a kind of fall that we have to be on guard against. It can lead to such dark places. It has some similarities to the fall of Satan himself, who presumes still to spread falsehood when he has long since lost all credibility. So we want to be on guard against that. Verse 7, moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. Outsiders here refers to non-believers. It's not just in the church community that an elder, a church leader, an overseer should be thought well of. Sometimes there can be church leaders that kind of like in their own insulated church community, they're top dog, they're very respected, they're revered, but like people outside of that community think they are jerks, that they are horrible people. And so we've got to pay attention to this as we're evaluating potential leaders, and as we are looking to be influencers ourselves. We should be well thought of by non-believers. Even non-believers should think well of those who are in church leadership, which here refers to this idea of being well thought of. Just having an honorable reputation. Now, this should be understood, I think, as a generalized statement. We can't control what every single person thinks about us. And some have falsely negative views of truly good people. Additionally, when this was written, social media didn't exist. Reputations were built largely from actual in-person interaction. So I'm not confident someone would be disqualified as an elder if a post they put on social media gets taken out of context and then they're hated by some people online for it. That said, the danger Paul is warning against is falling into a state of disgrace, which in the Greek means a state of reproach, being discredited and under blame. Church leaders, more than other church members, represent the church to non-believers. When they are discredited, when they are under blame, the church is hugely affected. We've seen this many times when leaders of large, prominent churches have a public moral failure. It also happens when church leaders are unnecessarily abrasive and fiery in the way they express themselves, or when they boldly make statements that are harsh, unloving, and sometimes even unbiblical. On a smaller scale, but still very impactful in our own circles, we as geeks can fall into this sort of disgrace by behavior that unnecessarily leads non-believers to dislike us. This is easy to miss when we are saying something that in itself actually is true, but we're missing the fact that we're saying it without any detectable love, or at the wrong time and in the wrong context, or in the wrong way. We can't just be strong in our thinking and knowledge. We have to be growing as students of communication and compassion so that even non-Christians will say we're honorable. Even if they disagree with what we're saying, they'll look and say, that guy, he's got some whacked out views. He seems like a good guy. That's what should be able to be said of us as we express ourselves. The outcome being warned against is falling into a snare of the devil. This could refer to falling into a snare similar to the one Satan fell into, but most scholars seem to see this as being a snare the devil creates for the unsuspecting elder. Church leaders and regular Christians with the potential to influence others are tactically valuable targets for our enemy, the devil. If you think you have words worth sharing or influence worth having an effect on others, you may be right. And if so, you have all the more reason to suspect that you'll be targeted for a discrediting fall, whether that's on a big scale or just kind of in your smaller social circles. And so as we seek to influence others, it's vital that we remain humble before the Lord and before those we interact with, and grow in the art of compassionate, humble conversation and interaction that even non-Christians will respect. Okay, what do you guys think of all that? How's that striking you? What are you pondering right now? You can let me know in the comments. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.